Hi, I'm Peter Kamström of the Swedish blog Supervegobloggen. In this presentation, I will talk about ethical veganism. My name is Peter Kamström, as I said. I'm the editor-in-chief of this blog. I'm a writer. I'm a member of a lot of organizations, some Swedish, some international, and I'm also an activist and try to join as many movements as I can to try to change the world, specifically for the animals, but everything that we do for the animals, of course, also benefits us humans. That's my baseline. And on the picture on the right there, you see me in Malaga talking against bullfighting, which is, of course, one of the many atrocities that I'm against. So in this presentation, I will talk for about an hour, probably a bit more. I'll talk about the ethics of veganism. A little bit of environment, a little bit of health will come in, of course, it's all connected, but I'll focus on the ethics of veganism. I'm going to talk mainly or only about the reality. I will not show any scary pictures. If you want to see scary pictures, I recommend there are lots of movies about that. For example, Earthlings, and the newer one, which is called Dominion, which show the reality of what's going on to different animals. I'm trying to appeal to the logical, empathical side without trying to scare you. The reality is very scary, but I'm not going to show any pictures of scary things in this presentation. I'm just going to appeal to your sense of logic and your sense of compassion. So that's what I'm going to do. Usually when I do these presentations, I do them in front of a live audience. And if you want to listen, of course, live, then that's much better and we can have a dialogue around these things. But now I'm just going to talk, so leave your comments in the comments of this YouTube video. All right, moving on. I'm going to start with some definitions. So the veganism is what we're talking about here. It's a movement and a philosophical idea that we look out for the victims. We stand for change. We think that veganism is, of course, right. And it's about 2% or so of the human population of the planet that consider themselves vegans today. It is a strong movement. It's growing. It's one of the fastest growing movements ever in history. So that's good, but we're still very small. Our primary means of working is the boycott. We do not purchase items that use animals in any way, shape, or form. So that's the most important way that vegans work. But of course, we do all kinds of different types of activism also. But not paying for animal cruelty is the most important thing that we do. The opposite side of veganism is carnism, and that treats animals as objects. They do not, they don't count on the suffering of animals. They don't consider it an important factor in anything really in reality. It's the status quo. Almost everybody are carnists one way or another. And of course, the underlying motivation is that we can do this to the animals, and therefore we have the right to do so. Might is right. That's the underlying philosophy of it. 98% of the human population are carnists one way or another. And the main activity that carnists do is to sponsor this. They sponsor it directly by purchasing animal products, by purchasing meat, fish, leather, and all these things. And that's the main activity. And also, of course, this is backed by tradition and history, and most people have always been carnists. So it's a very, very strong philosophy. And most people wouldn't even consider it a philosophy. It's a rather new concept that was invented or thrown up by Melanie Joy. By Melanie Joy, of course, I'm searching for the name there. Melanie Joy has an excellent lecture on carnism, and she's the one that made up that term. But of course, it's something that's always been there, but she made up the term. All right, moving on. We also need to define the words need and want, and of course, those are well-known terms, but it's important that we use them in the correct way. Something that you need is something that is essential for life. If you don't get that, you die. There are no other options. They're crucial. Humans, of course, need amino acids, we need fats, we need vitamins, we need fibers, and lots of other things. The word want, I want something, that means that it's something that we are used to. Maybe we have a taste, we have a preference, we have a tradition, we have a fashion, we have a style, or we think that we deserve this. So humans do not need animals in the form of meat or milk or anything like that. We don't need, there's nothing magical in meat that we need. Many people want milk, cow's milk, they want meat and all other things, but it's not a need. So we need to use these words carefully. So I forgot one point in my previous slide, so let's go back. I'm going to first show some principles, and I'm going to show examples of those principles in action. So this is my definition slide. I hope we have no arguments around these definitions. So the first thing that we're going to look into is the principle that animals can be victims. On the left here you see a somewhat scary picture, maybe both scary pictures, of course, if you think about it, that an animal is being kicked. A dog is being kicked by a human being. And on the right you see a cow being killed, or euthanized actually, by another human being. And the baseline in veganism is that we recognize that animals can be victims. And it's important to use the words that animals are being killed. They're not being slaughtered, they're being killed, they're being murdered, because they are being killed against their will. And when we're talking about moral worth, it's important to notice that we don't have to equate, we don't have to give the same value to an animal as a human. We're all speciesists in one way or another, and most of us value human life above other life. But that's not the point. We don't have to argue about how important is an animal, and do animals have to have the same value as a human being. I would readily admit that animals, in my opinion, in my speciesist opinion, are somewhat less valuable than humans for me, which not for the ecosystem and not from other, but I value, if I see a baby and a calf and I have to rescue one of them, I would rescue the human baby. That's how speciesist I am. But my point here is that the moral worth of that calf, I would rescue both of them if I could, of course. So the moral worth of an animal is more than zero, is larger than zero. So it is a moral wrong to hurt or kill or fail to protect an animal. That's a baseline of veganism. They're not objects, they can feel pain. We'll go through that in the rest of the presentation here. So that's the important point. They have a moral worth that is larger than zero, and they are not objects. So when we're talking about the victim's perspective, there's a very important concept here, the concept of consent. Animals cannot give their consent. The baseline of all moral judgment is consent. Is the other party, does he or she give consent to what you're doing? Consenting adult is an important concept in morality in general. Humans have the power and the responsibility to give consent for whatever they're doing. They're entering into a contract, they give consent to whatever that contract is saying. Animals lack that power. They do not have the power to give consent. We cannot understand them so far. We cannot understand if they give consent or not. That they share that inability with babies and mentally challenged humans. And what do we do for the mentally challenged humans and the babies? Well, we protect them extra much. We cannot do anything to a baby, of course, because it needs our protection. And the same moral imperative applies to animals also. They cannot give consent, and therefore we need to give them extra protection. That whole thing, that whole perspective of taking the victim's perspective is very important. But it also shows that it's not about you. It's not about your consumption. It's not about your journey. The victim doesn't really care about how difficult it is for you to become vegan or how difficult your change is. We're looking at it from the victim's perspective. There's nothing to respect in the act of eating animals. There's nothing to respect in that at all. And you don't even have to care about animals at all. That's not the point. You have to care about the moral rule that you don't eat somebody unless they have given you their consent. That's the whole point. So well, very often when you're having discussion about eating animals, you get into the position of arguing about the perpetrators, the offender's perspective. I like meat. Yes, but it's not about you. It's about the animal who is being eaten. So that's important to take that perspective always. All right, moving on from the victim's perspective, here's an illustration of that, of the animal love, pet love. It's important what we're talking about here. When you love animals, you don't eat them because that's kind of the point. The animals want to live, and most people feel that inherently when it comes to dogs, that they love them, but they don't care anything for pigs. So therefore they eat the pigs or the chickens or whatever. So that's one illustration of that, of course. The journey is an illustration of the journey. And often people are asking for credits for the effort, not for the results. It's very good to use the burglary example here. That if somebody would tell you that nowadays I only burgle, I only break into people's houses once a week, how would you react to that statement? That's, you shouldn't be breaking into people's houses at all. Just stop it. Don't do it. It's not necessary. You can survive without breaking into people's houses. There are other ways. The other illustration to the right here, I draw on the 5 puppies this week, is of course another way of illustrating that you're getting credits for trying, not for the results. If you drown just 5 puppies this week, that's not a good thing. It might be an improvement, but you need to stop drowning puppies and you need to stop eating animals. That's the whole point of the journey here. Social, of course, costs are, of course, important. I mean, people are bound by traditions and social dogma to eat meat all the time. So that is a real cost, and we need to talk about that and help that. But yeah, compared to the animals' cost, that's a very small cost, of course. And again, when we're talking about respecting somebody's choice of eating animals, we can respect the human being, but let's not respect the action. The action of eating an animal is not something that you should respect. Just as you should not respect the act of smoking or drinking alcohol or taking drugs or doing anything else that is, you might respect the person who's taking those drugs, but respecting the action of taking the drugs or taking the life in terms of meat, that is not something to be respected. It's something to be, informed. And you would not react with respect to a smoker, an alcoholic, a burglar, or a murderer. I respect your choice to murder all those or do all those things. You might respect the person that, wow, you're really grown since you committed those murders, and I respect you as a person, but I do never ever respect the act that you did of murdering somebody. And the personal choice, of course, no, it's not a personal choice if it involves somebody else. It's not a personal choice to commit a crime against someone else. That's not within your personal rights. It's not your personal choice anymore. Also, the violence against animals is very much connected to violence against animals, and it's proven that violence against animals lead, abusers in general, abusers of women and serial murders, etc. They often start with animals, and so it's all connected. That's an important thing, an important point there. All right, let's start with the most basic thing, maybe animal intelligence. One definition of intelligence is that you have the ability to acquire and apply knowledge. And animals, no doubt, have that ability. They can do a lot of different things. And the difficulty in doing research on animal intelligence is that we cannot give them an intelligence test. And even intelligence tests for humans are very, very difficult to ascertain. And there have been very many questions regarding that capability. The intelligence tests in general measure the ability to perform well on intelligence tests. That's the general definition, but it's not really a definition of much else than that. So when we're talking about an animal intelligence, we're really talking about self-awareness, problem-solving, memory, planning for the future, face recognition, name recognition or giving names, social structures, and communication and language. And the more we research animals, different types of animals, and all different types of animals, the more we find that they have a variance of this. It's not exactly like what we humans have, but it's definitely some kind of intelligence there. So that animals have intelligence is without question. And there's a really good book about this. It's called Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? And I really recommend that book. And the short answer to the question in the book is no, we're not. We think we might be smart enough to evaluate them, but we're really not. We're learning more and more. And there are, as I said, examples and evidence for all of these types of animal intelligence. So intelligence is one thing, of course. On the other hand, this presentation is about morals, and we don't consider it right to kill. We don't consider it more right to kill a human that's less intelligent. It's still wrong to kill a human no matter what their intelligence is. So intelligence is just one aspect of being human. It does not, even if animals are less intelligent than us, it does not motivate or excuse them being killed. Right, moving on to animal emotions. Again, the more we research animal emotions, the more we find that they are capable of it. And this is not really in question at all. When you see advertisements for animal products, you will see animal emotions being used all the time. You see happy cows, happy chickens, happy pigs on all the packaging, and happy bees even for selling honey. And so the question that they can be happy is being used by advertisers all around to to sell the product. But of course, they have a full range of feelings, and the more we learn about animals, the more we discover that they have individuality. They can feel pain, they can feel fear, they feel anticipation, even love and desire, curiosity, and also the whole idea of that. We developed from animals, so that we should get feelings and they didn't get them. It doesn't really make sense that a whole new set of capabilities would evolve just for humans and no other animals. So the simplest solution is that all animals have this, and it's the Occam's razor. Also, of course, when we're testing drugs, we're testing drugs to make us happy, like pharmaceuticals, we're testing those on drugs. So we have rats that are chronically depressed, and we test the drugs and see, how fast do they run, through mazes, stuff like that. So there's considerable evidence that we do test on that animals have feelings also. But the most important thing when it comes to feelings is, of course, do they feel pain? And when it comes to animal pain, I chose a picture of a ladybug to the right there. And of course, a ladybug is a really cute little insect. And nobody would crush that thing. Nobody would consciously hurt it if they could avoid it. It's a beautiful, nice little bug, right? Um, so why do we feel that way? Well, it's because it's cute and it's colorful, of course. Um, and of course, that's because that's the way it is. They do feel pain, and it would be a bad thing to inflict pain on that. So the question regarding animal pain is really, can they experience pain or can they feel pain? What's the difference between how an animal feel, what they do with the pain receptors? They have the same receptors that we do. It's fundamental in all animals. They have the same nerve endings, they have the same receptors in the brain, and they have the same nervous system, of course, so they have the ability to transport signals in their system about pain. And they pull away, they stay away, they wriggle away, and they also react to opioids the same way we do. And they produce endorphins internally, so they work the same way that we do. And so that there's very little doubt that all animals, including fish, including insects, have a sense of, an experience of the ability to feel pain. Of course, that has moral implications. Inflicting pain on a non-consenting consentient being is a moral transgression, and we should not do it. So that's the bottom line when it comes to animal pain. So when we're talking about veganism and ethical veganism, we're not talking about animal welfare. This is a very good illustration to the right there. I care about animals, so I buy organic, so on. That's not what we vegans do. We care about animals, so we want to leave them as much alone as we possibly can. When we're looking for animal welfare, we're looking for a good way to do what is morally wrong. We're looking for better cages. We're trying to find a way to do humane slaughter, minimize transport, more hours with the mother. We get seals of approvals. And of course, these are all scams to try to prove that you can buy this product with a good conscience. And of course, that is a lie, because the animal has not given its consent and it does not want to be there. A very good example is this certifiable sustainable seafood stamp that's found on a lot of seafood. As we'll see later, about 90% of all fisheries are overfished or extremely overfished on the planet today. So the whole idea of sustainable seafood is ludicrous. So that the stamp, if you go in and research that stamp, and what are the rules actually implied? How do we euthanize the fish? What size of nets need to be there? How much bycatch can you catch? There are very, very few such rules at all. In terms of euthanasia, that doesn't apply to fish at all. They're just allowed to suffocate. That's what's happening to fish. So it's not about animal welfare at all there. And the whole word sustainable, of course, needs a definition. How long is this sustainable? And that's not part of the stamp. They have not specified that if we continue fishing in this way, we can continue for X amount of years. That would be a good definition of the word sustainable. That has not happened. So this is totally a marketing ploy that tries to sell you the idea of sustainable fish. All right, moving on. So we're not talking about animal welfare. We're talking about animal rights. And of course, the animal rights that they want and need is the right to be left alone. That's it. They don't want voting rights. They don't want to go to school or anything like that. They just want to be left alone, get their own habitats and be left alone. So that's what we're talking about, the right to be left alone. not to be exploited, not to be eaten, not to be inseminated, not to be transported, and so on. So when we're talking about animals, it's also important to talk about lifespan. We often hear that people are willing to eat animals as long as they had a good life before they died. Well, they didn't. They didn't in any way, shape, or form. One aspect of that is they didn't have a full life. They didn't have a lifespan. So chickens, for example, can live up to 8 years. They're typically killed at 6 weeks when they're bred for chicken for meat. And the laws usually spell that the animals are supposed to have a natural life, and they're supposed to be able to get to do their natural behavior. And of course, they're not. A natural lifespan is not a fraction of the natural lifespan. So that's a good illustration. And of course, the natural behavior, they are supposed to grow up with their family in most cases. Most of these animals grow up with their families one way or another, and they forage for food, they play, they do all kinds of interesting social things, and they're not allowed to do that in captivity, of course. Pigs and chickens are the most horrible examples, but fish grown in fish farms, that's even worse. So yeah, the more you look into it, the more examples there are. So lifespan is one important aspect of this thing. Legality. So when we're talking about animal rights and ethical veganism, it's not about legality. All these things that we're talking about here are generally legal. That does not mean that they're moral. There's a difference there. There are a lot of things in history that, a lot of abuses that has happened that were legal at the time. Witch trials is a good example. They were legal. And of course, all of these examples that you see to the right. So there are lots of different rules. If you care about halal and kosher, for example, that's one of those rules that you might find very good. Many Muslim people are extremely proud of the way that their meat is slaughtered because they think that is much better for the animals. They're horrified by the whole sedation process that goes on in non-halal slaughter. They think halal slaughter is much better. Well, that discussion aside, I think they shouldn't be slaughtered at all. That's the real discussion, of course, here. But chickens, fish, and rabbits are not sedated at all. They're too small. So it's legal to kill them without sedation. So if you're concerned about halal slaughter because they slaughter because they're not sedated before being slaughtered, well then you should definitely not eat chickens, fish, rabbits, and so on. Pigs are generally gassed, and that's legal, and of course that's a horrible way to die. You suffocate, and yeah, it's a very horrible story, and I won't show a video of that, but please go out and look for pigs gassed if you doubt my word here. So we're not talking about legality, we're talking about morality here. That's the principle. The numbers are really, really scary. Here's one illustration of that. How many fish and other animals are killed every second. Of course, the fish is not even counted as individuals. Usually it's counted in metric tons. But this is just an estimation based on industry data. A good number to think about here is 3,000 land animals every second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year is the numbers of animals killed for food. This is just for food. We have other ways or motives that animals are being killed also, but this is just for food. So it's of course a horrible number. The more you look at it, the scarier it gets. So let's move on from that slide, the numbers. Top of the food chain is a regular motivation for motivating people to eat meat. Of course, we're neither the strongest, the fastest. We don't have the sharpest claws. We don't have the sharpest teeth. The reason that we are able to dominate the rest of the food chain or the rest of the ecology or the rest of the planet is that we have collaboration and tools. And in fact, if you look at it, all civilizations, there are some tribes that don't live on plants, but all major civilization got started and are based on plants. It's rice, corn, barley, wheat, cabbage, hemp, potatoes, bananas, cotton. Those are some of the main plants that built civilizations. The first civilizations in South America were, of course, based on corn. The Asian civilizations were based on rice. The Babylonians were based on barley, and so on. There's never been a big civilization that was fundamentally based on meat or animal products at all. All right, moving on. So religion. Is veganism a religion? Does it rely on ancient beliefs? No, it doesn't. Does it challenge beliefs? Yes, it does. Is it based on science? Yes, of course it does. Is it consistent? Yes, it is morally consistent. There are some very basic rules or very fundamental ideas of veganism, that it's wrong to abuse animals. Very, very simple. Is it consistent based on that? Yes, it is consistent, as I will continue to show in this presentation. Does it require animal sacrifice? Almost all religions do require animal sacrifice in one way or another, or at least have done so in the past. Does it rely on logic? Yes, of course, veganism does rely on logic, as I'm trying to show in this presentation. Well, so is veganism in conflict with religion? In some ways, yes, of course it is, because it challenges all those old traditions. But there's also the fundamental concept of the golden rules. In all religions have some variant of this, the do unto others rule, that treat others in the way that you want to be treated yourself. All religions have some variant of that rule. So there are vegans of every religious faith. You can motivate your veganism in reference to your whatever God you believe in, and you don't. There are in most religions, well, actually most except for Rastafari, condone the use of animals. But they do not, it's not mandatory, it's not obligatory. You don't have to kill animals. You're allowed to do it, but you're not required to do it. So it's certainly possible, if you believe in one of the gods or one of the religions, to motivate and continue to be in that religion, and motivate your veganism with the golden rule. All right, self-righteous vegans. Are vegans trying to preach to you? Are they trying to say that they're better than you? No, in fact, we're not saying we're better than anybody else. We're saying that we are on very equal. We're trying to be on equal terms with the animal. I don't feel superior, and it doesn't make me superior to eat another being. So we're trying to open people's eyes and teach them. So that's what I'm doing here. I've been teaching for 30 years, and now the most important thing that I teach is veganism. And it's not about preaching. It's not about being self-righteous or being superior in any way. I'm just trying to show what the animals are experiencing and what the environmental impacts and the human health impacts of it are also, of course. That's what I keep talking about. So extreme, are we extreme? Is it extreme to not use animals? Is it extreme to not eat dogs? I don't think so. I think I never eat dog because I think it's the wrong thing to do. And I never eat meat, fish, or eggs or dairy because I think it's wrong too. So it's not being extreme, it's being morally consistent. So are we militant then? Are we beating farmers down? Are we doing liberations? Yes, actually we are doing liberations. It's a rather rare form of activism, but it does happen. And there are good motivations for liberating the animals that are about to die, of course. And what you see here in the video clip are some animal farmers that are protesting that they don't get enough subsidies from the European Union. And I challenge anyone to find militant vegans that are behaving in this way by spraying the police with milk powder, even soy powder. We have never done that. No vegans have ever done that. Burning hay and all kinds of things. This has never happened in vegan activism at all, but of course it happens often in terms of militant farmers. And the whole idea of militant vegans is mostly propaganda from the animal agriculture industry. So moving on from that, the militant vegans. So protecting the economy then. Well, there are a bunch of jobs that rely on abusing animals, more or less. Yes, there are. There are all the way from bullfighters to slaughterers to restaurant owners, etc. And their reality certainly needs to change to liberate the animals, no doubt about it. But when we're talking about most of these jobs, especially the slaughterhouse jobs, they're really, really bad jobs. They're really connected to post-traumatic stress syndrome, and people are not faring well in a slaughterhouse. This is a huge market. It's about 88 billion US dollars per year. So of course, it's fighting tooth and nails to continue making a lot of money based on that. And the European Union gives about 40 billion euros per year in subsidies to this industry directly. So of course, the economy is an important thing, but vegans do not think it's worth to keep killing animals or abusing animals in any way to protect the economy. The economy needs to adapt and needs to change. And it's the lives of the animals that's the important thing, of course, not protecting the economy. So let's start with examples. So let's start by examples here. The first example that we're doing is eating dogs. It happens quite a lot. There's a Yulin festival every year, and every year there's protests against that, and there's pictures from animal transports when they're transporting dogs and outrage over that. And yes, of course, this is definitely wrong. It happens in China, it happens in South Korea, Vietnam, Nigeria. About 25 million dogs every year are killed this way. Dogs suffer, they're transported, they're slaughtered, they're separated from their families. Yes, dogs have families also, of course. And even more animals are killed because those dogs are usually fed meat during their lifespan. So of course this is a hugely wasteful thing to do. And I don't think we have to argue more about this, that most people that see this video will consider it morally wrong to eat animals, or to eat to eat dogs, of course. So that example of eating animals is wrong. That's rather well accepted. So let's move on to something a bit more difficult, maybe. Bullfighting. Bulls and horses, of course, suffer both in the bullfighting ring. The more you learn about the details of a bullfight, the scarier it gets for everybody involved. The bulls are not aggressive, as we see in the video to the right here. We see a bull running around trying to find a way out, but it's not attacking all of these students in Mexico that have done this example. To make them aggressive, you have to put Vaseline in their eyes and chili up their anuses and give them drugs and all kinds of things to make them suffer and make them confused. It's an extended torture, and they have different lengths of knives so that they can torture them bit by bit and kill them slowly and make a show out of it. Of course, the bulls are extremely afraid. They're transported. If a bull manages to kill the bullfighter, then his whole family is killed. And there's not only bullfights, there are bull runs, there are bull fires where you put fire in the horns of the bulls, there are drownings, and this is not just in Spain, it happens in South America, as we see in Mexico here. and also in southern France it happens. And also there are subsidies given to this. The EU agriculture subsidies give 100 million euros every year in subsidies to bullfighting. So of course this is an outrage and something that's not even supported in Spain. About 80% of the Spaniards are anti-taurinos. They're not in favor of this tradition at all. Moving on. Seal hunting. About 2 million seals have been killed since 2002. This is the classic animal defense cause. Brigitte Bardot on the top there, she made a famous picture with a seal, a baby seal being slaughtered about 30 years ago when Greenpeace was founded, based on that. And this is still going on. In 2018, this is still happening. It's happening in Canada, but very few people wear seal furs now. So what they do instead, to build a new market for this industry, they actually take the penises and sell them as enhancers for Asian men mostly that want to get more virile, get it up. This is of course also another outrage. And let's connect this back now to the need and want. There are of course lots of people that want to get, well, seal penises, evidently, but it's obviously not something that we need, and it's not something that we should support or allow even. So trophy hunting, another thing. Wild animals in the world have gone down by 50% since 1970. And trophy hunting is one of the causes of that. It's not a conservation method. There are a lot of hunters that claim that they are animal lovers and this is their contribution. But when you're looking at the numbers and the consequences of hunting, it's definitely not helping the conservation effort. So the methods of protesting is of course, to not do it. That's the most important thing, of course. Don't go hunting, don't go trophy hunting. Also, the airline transports, those trophies, a lot of airlines do not allow these kind of trophies to be transported on their flights because of protests. So a lot of vegans have protested against this and got it to stop. Non-vegans also, there are people who are just protesting against trophy hunting, no doubt about it. So airline transports is one way to get this stopped. If they can't get their trophies home, they won't go to Africa to kill animals there. Animal agriculture is of course a huge culprit here also. Animal agriculture is taking their lands and causing lots of problems for the wild animals also. All right, whaling is another outrage, another thing that we definitely do not need. We do not need to kill whales. It's been banned globally since 1986. The meat of whales contain a lot of mercury, so you really don't want to eat it. It's not healthy at all. They're of course very intelligent animals, and they're a very important part of ocean ecology. To the right there now you see pictures from the yearly pilot whale hunt in the Faroe Islands, which is of course a very, very cruel tradition where they're killed after being driven onto shore by boats. Sea Shepherd is the only organization that goes there every year and tries to stop this against the explicit orders of the Danish government, and the Danish military are there to protect this tradition every year. So of course this is something that Faroe Island people do not need, the Danish people do not need it, and it might be something that they want, but it's of course a horrible thing. Whaling happens not only in the Faroe Islands, it happens in Japan. Japan is a big culprit there, and Norway and Iceland are the other countries that do it. And of course, again, this is not something that we need. It might be something that we want, but it's not something that is morally defensible. Circus animals is another thing. The main problems with circus animals is their training, their confinement, their transports. This is still legal in many countries, including Sweden, and the main way to do this is, of course, to work with legal authorities that they should get permits to transport animals like this, and of course we should boycott it. This last image here to the right is from a transport in Spain that got into a road accident, and there were 5 elephants on the transport, and 2 of them died, and the other 3 were injured, as we see here. So of course this is not natural for elephants to be in a truck going on a highway in Spain, and of course it's not something that we humans need at all. So this is something that we should boycott, and yeah. Fur is another thing. It happens to a lot of different animals. It happens to minks, foxes, wolves, and rats. The industry claims there's such a thing as sustainable fur. It's about a $40 billion per year industry. So it's a large industry. They eat meat, mostly slaughter waste, so this is another way to make the meat industry profitable. It's a rather cheap product, actually, the fur. It's such a big industry, so they managed to get their costs down. So when a lot of the fur that's sold as fake fur is actually real fur. It's also very common that cats and dogs are sold as fur, or their skins, of course. Also, there's environmental problems with fur because you need to make sure that it doesn't deteriorate, so I have to use a lot of chemicals in it. And there's a lot of pollution from the actual fur farms, of course. So fur is definitely something that we do not need, and it's not sustainable anyway. And yeah. Leather, about the same thing as the fur. There are lots of animals being killed. More than 1 billion animals every year. It's being killed again. It's pigs, sheep, dogs, and cats. And usually there's no marking on leather. You might say real leather, but it's usually not specified which country that leather is from, or even which animal it is from. So when you're looking at leather, you'll probably have no idea how that animal lived. So leather is definitely something that is bad from a moral perspective, and of course from an environmental perspective also. Again, you need to use a lot of chemicals to treat the leather so that it doesn't rot. The biggest producers of leather are China and India, and of course they're having huge environmental problems because of this. Let's move on to different types of meats. We're going to start with pig meats. The pigs are almost always indoors. They're never let out to forage or anything. Their natural behaviors of a pig include nesting, playing games, foraging, rooting, socializing. They're very intelligent, and they're almost as social as dogs. And their feed now includes fish, soy, palm oil, and antibiotics. And varying degrees across the world, Sweden brags that we use less antibiotics, but we still use way too much for pigs, of course. We shouldn't be using any. So those are some of the reasons to not eat pig meat. Moving on to chicken meat. Again, they're almost never outdoors. There are up to 40,000 chickens in a barn, legally. Of course, again, they're fed soy, palm oil, and fish. Of course, there's nothing natural about living 40,000 animals of the same age in a barn. So, yes, they suffer also, and this is something that we do not need. Might be something that we want, but it's not something that we need. Chicken advertising, of course, is really scary. It's marketing to children. The chicken McNuggets, you've heard of those. It's marketing as lean, clean, and white meat, and it's marketed as environmentally friendly. They're also using words like free range, cage free, and that still means that they are in a barn all of their lives. So it's a really scary thing. And they are environmentally friendly if you compare them, if you compare chicken meat to cow's meat. Yes, it is much less bad. But if you compare chicken meat to vegetables or fruit, the fruit will win all the time. And of course, from a moral perspective, the the apple will not scream. The chicken, no doubt, will. The eggs, it has all the egg industry has all the problems of chicken. Also, all the male chickens do not, of course, produce any eggs. They Therefore, they are ground up. In Sweden, I know the number by heart is 15,000 chickens every day. They're not ground up in Sweden. They're suffocated with carbon dioxide, which is a horrible way to die. And of course, they have to collect them and put them in a gas chamber. But in most of the world, grinding is the legal and approved way of doing it. The eggs are, in fact, the period of very much like the period of the chicken. They're ovulating. That's what we're doing. That's what the chicken is doing, of course. And it comes out the cloaca. It comes out the same hole that the urine and the shit comes out of. So it's nothing. When you start thinking about it, it becomes more and more disgusting, of course. So eggs is nothing that we need. It might be something that we want, but it's definitely not something that we need, and it's definitely morally wrong to eat eggs. Cow meat, of course, the cow is the very symbol of compassion. It's also the most wasteful type of meat because it uses so much resources. So, of course, cows suffer in the same way all other animals do, and it requires almost 16,000 liters of water to produce a kilo of cow meat. And actually, sorry, 10,000 is the number I'm usually referencing there. Others are using 16,000, but it's a whole lot at least. And also it uses a lot of other resources also, and emits about 16 kilos of carbon dioxide for every kilo of cow meat. Milk is, of course, a horrendous thing. It helps the cow meat industry, of course. The male cows don't produce any milk, so they are veal. You have to inseminate the cow to make it industrially viable economically. The separation of the mother and cow is, of course, a horrible thing for the mother and the baby. You need to masturbate the cow, of course, to get the semen out, and that's, of course, a rather disgusting practice. The cows are inseminated yearly because, as all other animals, they only give milk when they are pregnant, when they've had a baby. After they're pregnant, of course, the calf is taken away. After a few years, usually 4 to 6 years, the cow is considered spent. That means that it can no longer produce milk in the enormous quantities required, about 30 liters a day, the industry average. So then they're, of course, killed. Cows are very often struck by a disease called mastitis, and it's a very painful disease of the udders. And so I don't remember the numbers now, but it's really high. I think it's 25% or something like that of all cows in a given year have mastitis in Sweden. That's the numbers I know. Huge subsidies are given to the milk industry, and there's a lot of propaganda. The little image you see down to the left there is a nose ring that you put in the nose of a calf so that it doesn't drink the cow of the milk of the cow. In those cases where the calf is actually allowed to be with the mother, which is rare. Most of the cases they're separated rather quickly. Some milk graphics. Of course, you wouldn't drink dog's milk or elephant's milk. Why would you drink cow's milk? Proteins, that's how calves are treated. They're placed in booths. And of course, cow's milk, it would only be natural for calves. A lot of good illustrations about milk here. Yeah. And of course, this is not something that we need. It's something that we might want, but it's definitely not something that humans need. All right, I think that's the end of the illustrations there. Let's move on to this grass range, the free range, grass fed, and so on. This is more marketing things about illustrations about that. Of course, they are just ways of illustrating that we treat our animals well. But of course, this is the same thing as with all animal abuse. No matter what you call it, the animal has not given its consent. And that's the baseline of ethical veganism. So let's talk about transport then. 28 hours of transport is legal inside the European Union. 8 hours is legal within Sweden. But if you're taking it across the border, of course, the EU rule applies. There's no such thing as an eco transport. There are no seat belts. There's usually no heating or no cooling in animal transport. There's no water. There's, of course, lots of excrement and fears. And the most horrible transport of all is the export ships, mainly from Australia to the Middle East and South America, but also from South America. A lot of these ships are going to the Middle East. So that's definitely something that should be outlawed, but it isn't. And the more you learn about these export ships, the more horrible it is. But transporting animals is, of course, something that causes immense amounts of suffering. And a very good thing to think about is would you leave your dog in a hot car? How long would you do that? Most people would answer maybe 5 minutes. Many people, my friends at least, my animalistas friends, they would say you don't leave your dog in the car at all, never. So why would you transport a car? Why would that be better in any way, shape, or form? All right, slaughter, of course. Humane slaughter, how would that even work? I've never heard anybody describe a humane slaughter. How would you want to be killed? How would you want your dog to be killed? Well, with lots of care and hugs and maybe an injection. That's not how it's happening. There are no, cow huggers working at the slaughterhouse. There are no injections. They're using gassing bullets. They electrocute chickens in water baths. Halal kosher, we've already talked about that a little bit. There's no, of course, eco slaughterhouse. So if you're only buying ecological meat, you're still buying from the same slaughterhouse. There's no eco transport either, as we saw in the last slide. If you want to hear what happens in a slaughterhouse or see some of it also, you should join the SAVE movement. They are often doing vigils. They're doing wakes outside slaughterhouses, and they encounter trucks going into the slaughterhouse, and they listen to and they meet and they recognize the death of the animals. I've been doing that several times, and it's a really scary experience to hear the animals screaming and see into the eyes of the animals in the transport, where they see that, well, you can see their pain and their fear, of course. So there's no such thing as humane slaughter, and of course we don't need to slaughter animals at all. This is something that we're doing because of tradition, and of course we shouldn't. So fish then. Fish are of course not vegetables. There are a few numbers that we can think about here. 50% of the oxygen comes from the ocean. The levels of cyanobacteria and other living sea animals have decreased by 50% since 1970. We've already said that 90% of all fisheries are overextended or extremely overextended. 90% of bycatch on shrimp is, of course, a huge waste. And the large number of large fish on the planet have decreased by 90% since 1950. The pigs and chicken are large consumers of fish. We don't need fish to survive. There's plenty of omega-3 in lots of different plant foods, and most especially in seaweed, of course, which is an excellent ingredient to cook with. Plastic, many people are concerned by plastic, and the big plastic garbage patch in the Pacific consists about 46% of fishing equipment, including nets and boxes and all kinds of things. So plastic, if you're concerned about plastic, then you definitely should not be eating fish. And of course, we don't need it. Testing on animals. Well, why are we testing on animals in the first place? Well, the reason is that animals are like us. But why is it okay to test on animals? Because the animals are not like us? It's somewhat contradictory, don't you say? Don't you think? Yeah, and it is, of course. They can suffer in the same way that we can, so we should not be testing them. The image to the right there is a clamp that you put on a monkey, and you put the head in the big hole and the arms in the small hole so that you can fix the monkey and do whatever you want with the monkey, basically. About 100 million animals every year are used for animal testing, and of course this is something that's becoming less and less motivated from a scientific standpoint. There are better ways of testing drugs or testing procedures or testing anything really. So it's becoming less and less motivated from a scientific standpoint, and from a moral standpoint it is of course horribly, horribly wrong. So we talked about trophy hunting before, and the main motivation for non-trophy hunting is that we need to keep nature under control. And the movie there to the right is some dogs. I took this movie myself when I was out protesting against hunting. And these are dogs being used for hunting, and of course they're suffering also. The problem with keeping nature under control is of course that we've lost all natural stability in nature because we have destroyed it so much. So now there are too many elks or too many of something. So the hunters feel that they need to keep those populations under control. But the main problem is, of course, that we have killed off most of the natural predators in the world. In Sweden, that I know best, we have about 200 wolves left, and we're a really large country. So, of course, we need those wolves to have a natural balance. And we cannot achieve that balance. It has never been achieved in the history of the world. There's never been a hunter society, much less a hunter civilization, that's lived in balance with nature. Mercy killings might be motivated as long as we cannot protect the animals from being hit by cars, etc. Of course, we do need to take care of those, and that would be morally right to do so. But of course, the better way of doing it is have as many wildlife crossings as possible. And it turns out that animals are really good at learning those kind of things. They avoid, if there is a wildlife crossing, they use that and they don't walk into the road. All right, moving on. Wool. Wool is, of course, another animal product that we do not need. We might want it, we might think it keeps us warm, etc., but it's not needed. On the movie to the right there, we see a sheep, of course, being impregnated and or being prepared for impregnation. And that method that we're seeing there, putting them into that machine, is advertised as a very humane way of doing it. And it probably is. Actually, it probably is less bad than having to do that by hand, because you can treat the animal, you have total control of the animal in that way. But of course, it looks terribly horrible. So all the animals that are being bred for wool are damaged breeds that grow too much hair. So yes, they do need to be, their hair needs to be cut because they grow too much hair. But that's because we've bred them that way. So of course we should stop breeding animals that are not sustainable and that cannot live by themselves. So some facts about that is that about 90% of the sheep wool is grown in Australia, and of course Australia is a really hot and dry land, or continent actually, and so having too much hair in a country where it's hot and dry sounds like a horrible idea. And we have, of course, better ways of producing fabric than using animals. They also do this live export. Remember the live export ships that I mentioned before? About 4 million animals are shipped like that every year from Australia. Angora wool is, of course, a very beautiful, nice-looking type of wool until you start thinking about how it's made. It's made in China, about 90% of it, and it's done by hand ripping the fur off the Angora rabbits every 3 months. And usually they can survive about 3 fur rippings, and then they die. There's also a concept called mulesing, which I'm not going to show a picture of, but it's a way of cutting a big sore on the buttocks of a sheep so that the bugs are concentrated there. It's really a horrible thing, and it's an industry standard, especially in Australia. All right, moving on. And of course, we don't need wool. It might be something that we want, but it's not something that we need. Moving on to zoos. There are more than 10,000 zoos worldwide. Of course, this is not natural in any way, shape, or form. It's not beneficial for the prisoners, the animals in those zoos. It does not save the animals, and it does not educate the children, especially either. They can, of course, watch documentaries, visit wild animals in the free, or see animals in another way. For example, kids often know a lot about dinosaurs, and we don't have any dinosaurs in captivity. So having animals in captivity in 10,000 prison camps around the world is, of course, not anything that we need to do. It's not something that's neither morally, ecologically, or any other way defensible at all. It does not save the animals. There are a few animals that have been saved, but if we need to keep animals in protection for their own, in captivity for their own protection, of course we should do that in sanctuary to have them as free as possible. We do not need 10,000 of them. We do not need to support these things, and it should not be permissible to make money off the imprisonment of animals without their consent, which they can't give, as we stated in the beginning. So that's the vegan ethical position on zoos. Moving on to insects. Insects are, of course, animals, and they are sentient and can feel pain. They have a brain and a nervous system, and the world without insects would be a very scary world. And the number of insects in Germany has gone down by 76% since 1989. So this is going down fast, and it's a really scary concept. There are a lot of people talking about starting to eat insects. And of course, most of the people of the world do not eat insects today. They would have to learn how to eat insects. And the vegan position on this is, of course, that since they feel pain, if we start eating insects, there would be more suffering in the world. And of course, it's much easier to learn how to eat vegan food than to learn how to eat insects. And they might be more less susceptible. They might be less susceptible. I can't say that word. When we put insects together very tightly, they might not get as many diseases as chickens and cows do, but we don't really know that. We have not done industrial scale insect farming in most cases. So it's a scary concept, and putting plants together, we know that works just perfectly. They do not develop disease by being close together. Animals do get disease in all shapes or forms, including, of course, farmed fish and farmed insect will probably get the same problem there. So from a moral perspective and from an environmental perspective, eating insects, abusing insects is wrong. So let's move on with some specific insects. Honey is, of course, an ingredient or animal product that we don't need. The bees, however, do need it. To get bees, we need to start by inseminating the bee queen, and this is what's called a rape rack for honey for a bee queen. You need to inseminate it to get the whole process running. It's not a natural process in any way. They can, of course, feel pain, and you want the queen to stay put, so you rip the wings off it, of course, and usually when you hear of somebody ripping the wings of an insect, you think that's a problem child or something like that, or a very troubled adult, but this is the basis of the whole honey industry. And of course, this is sugar. It's basically carbohydrates being vomited 50 times back and forth. They vomit and then they eat it again, then vomit it again, up to 50 times, and they do that. So eating sugar that's been vomited 50 times by an insect does not sound like a good idea, and it's not something that we need, neither for health, and of course it's deplorable from a moral perspective. Silk, again, we're in with the body fluids of another animal, and this is the worm, the silkworm. Usually what you do to get the cocoon, it's based on worm spit, and usually you boiled the worm alive, and there's about 160 million metric tons of silk being produced every year, and each kilo kills more than 4,000 worms, so that is about 700 billion individuals every year being killed for silk. And of course, silk does not do anything to keep us warm that's not something that we need. It's less than 0.2% of the fabric market in the world. So we certainly don't need to abuse these silkworms and wrap our bodies in worm spit. So moving on. Clams and other bivalves. Some people think that we could eat these things because they don't have a central nervous system, they can hardly move, and they don't have a brain, of course. But they do have nerve ganglia, and they do contain animal protein, which does cause a lot of problems from a health perspective. So when people say, at least I can eat clams and other bivalves, what I hear from an ethical perspective, at least I can kill them. Of course, clams and other bivalves are an important part. Oysters is another example there of a bivalve. We don't need them. We don't need to kill them. We don't know how much they want and feel, but it's unnecessary to kill them, of course. All right, so now we're moving into the bit more controversial areas about vegan babies. Are we forcing our beliefs on our babies if we give them vegan food? Of course, there are examples of parents that have killed their young or their babies by giving them really, really bad vegan food. So, of course, being vegan does not make you a good parent. So there are examples of bad vegan parents that have killed their babies, and that's deplorable and not defensible in any way, shape, or form, of course. But there are about 1 million children a year that are dying from malnutrition, and the main reason for that is poverty. The main reason is not veganism. Human children do not need anything from animals at all. There are no magic ingredients in animal protein. They don't need anything. Most human deficiencies of B12, iron, vitamin D, actually most people do have these deficiencies, no matter what the diet is. About 37% of all Americans have a B12 deficiency, and of course not 37% of Americans are vegans, regretfully. So there are a lot of nutritional problems with the way we eat today, but veganism is not the problem. And of course, when we're thinking about, since the human baby don't need the animal products, we do not have the moral right to um, kill something to give it to our baby. Also, um, if you put a baby, the classic example from Gary Yourofsky, you might have heard this one before, is that if you place a baby in a crib and you give that baby an apple and a rabbit, you would be very worried if the baby started eating the rabbit and played with the apple instead of the other way around. So a baby that starts ripping into the rabbit would be a scary concept. So, of course, babies can be vegan also. How about pet animals? Here we're getting into the real discussion area. There are about 200 million stray dogs and 100 million feral cats in the world today. Wild hunting pets cause huge problems all over the world because we've killed most of the natural predators of the world. These escaped animals or pets become a problem. The breeding and sales of pets is a huge problem, and it's not morally defensible. If you want to have a pet in your life, I would recommend adopting or taking care of an existing pet. Do not purchase one from a breeder, and breeders, of course, should not be supported at all. We humans have no need for a racially pure animal. We do need to take care of these 300 million pets that nobody's taking care of today. So that's the bottom line, of course, on that. We do need to take care of the pets, but we need to stop breeding them. And we probably need to decrease the number, especially of cats, that are causing a lot. Wild cats and free-running cats are causing a lot of deaths among wild animals. All right, moving on to pet animal food. Are we forcing our beliefs on the pets? Of course, as always, when we're talking about ethical veganism here, we're looking at who's the real victim here. And of course, we should look at the animal being eaten, not the animal who's being deprived of its right to eat meat. Of course, both cats and dogs and most other pet animals can eat meat. They're omnivores. Well, cats are carnivores, really, but dogs are omnivores, of course. They can thrive on plant food. They're genetically different from wolves. Dogs have lived with us for tens of thousands of years, and they have adapted to our diets. Cats are carnivores. They can thrive on supplemented plant food. They need some extra ingredients that can be made from plants also. But we can not give them just plants. You need to give them those supplements also. As with all animals, including human animals, we need nutrients. We don't need specific ingredients. The LA sanctuaries are moving to vegan dog food for all their rescued dogs there. And all the problems of the animal agriculture industry, of course, apply to pet food also. All the animals killed for food, about 30% of the animals killed for food are for pets. When we're looking at the food industry, the human food industry is scary, but when you're looking at the pet food industry, it's even worse. They're using something called rendered waste products. And if you look into that, you'll find that it's really a really scary ingredient. So the bottom line is that dogs and cats can be vegan. They can thrive on that diet. And when you're looking at what's morally right or wrong here, you should of course look at the real victim, the animal being eaten, not the predator animal that you might have as a pet. So you should do anything to protect the larger amounts of animals that are being eaten. Look at the victim's perspective. That is the ethical vegan perspective on pet animal food. And it's scientifically proven that both cats and dogs can thrive and survive, of course. They do not need to eat other animals. So there's no reason to give them that, except for that they're used to it, and it might be a big thing, of course, to change their diet. But the morally right thing to do is, of course, to give them plant-based food. And it's becoming easier and easier. There are more and more vegan alternatives for pets also. All right. So moving on to writing. Let's start this over again. There we go, writing. No animals need to be written. That's the bottom line. There are no animals that were biologically designed to be ridden. To ride a horse, you need to break it. That's what it's called in English. You break the horse, that means you break its will. It's no coincidence that we're not riding zebras, that we're not riding a lot of other animals. In Sweden, we could, of course, have been riding elks for decades because they're big and they're strong, and they should be able to be ridden, right? They're physically very much like a horse. So why are we not riding zebras? Why are we not riding the elks? Well, the reason is simply that they don't have the mentality. They cannot be broken. The horses are nice. That's the bottom line. They do not have as strong of a will as the elk does, as the zebra does. A zebra will bite you really hard if you try to ride it, and it will not stop biting you. So you don't want to ride a zebra. So the reason that we're using the horses for riding, or the elephants for riding, and other animals for riding, is that they are breakable. Most animals are not breakable. You cannot ride them. So if you manage to break a horse, then you use spurs, bridle, and a whip. If you think about these things, they are instruments that are intended to give pain and allow you as a human to control the animal. And of course, the animal, if you compare being stuck in a stable, the animal would probably enjoy going out and having you on its back. But if you compare it to being free, it wants to be free. And that's, of course, the moral baseline here, what we're comparing with. We're comparing a free animal to a captive animal. And of course, the free animal wants to be free. And all animals want to be free. That's the moral baseline. And of course, in 2018, we humans have no need whatsoever to be transported by an animal at all. Neither a donkey or a horse or an elephant. So the bottom line is that it's morally wrong to race and ride and whip a horse. Also, the sustained back pressure. If you sit, even if you have a baby on your back for a sustained period, it will give you back pain. And the animal is no exception. It's not built for, it's not intended for having sustained pressure on its back. So there's lots of research about horses having back problems due to people sitting on them. And of course, why would an animal evolve to be sat upon by other animals? It does not make any sense, any logical sense at all. So that's the ethical bottom line on riding. It's not something we need to do. It might be something that we want to do, but it's not something that we should do, and it's not vegan to ride any animal at all. Enjoy being with the animals, definitely, sure, but not riding them. Okay, so the final step there and here. What about plants then? Well, Plants have feelings, right? Well, actually, yes, they might have some kind of feelings. They might have some kind of reactions to their world around them. But there is a huge difference between plants and animals. They do not have a brain. They do not have a nervous system. They don't have anything like the ganglia that the bivalves have. They do not have the dopamine system. They do not react to opioids. And if you really want to get into plant rights, well, go into fruitarianism then. Just eat fruit, because nobody believes that an apple feels pain when you eat it. The tree might feel pain if you cut it down, possibly, um, but the fruit definitely does not. That's the whole point of the tree, is to give fruit. So there is a distinguished line here. The only time you hear people arguing for plant rights is when they're arguing with vegans. So they claim that, well, then you can't eat anything. So I might just as well eat everything. But there is a moral distinction between a plant and an animal. Also, if you want to protect the plants, which of course we should, we need all the living things on the planet, we need them. If you want to protect the plants, then you should definitely not eat an animal, because to produce animal meat, you need to give that animal lots and lots of plants. So when you're eating a kilo of plants, you're probably eating hundreds of thousands of kilos of plants. So if you care about plant feelings or life on the planet, then you should definitely not eat animals. So that's the bottom line on plants. So there are lots of other reasons to go vegan. Of course, the environment, we've mentioned that a little bit. 14% of all carbon dioxide emissions are because of the animal agriculture industry. Methane, nitrous dioxide emissions, water waste, land use waste, air pollution, oxygen is an important thing. The circle of life, of course, we need all this to be connected. Economics, a lot of grain is exported from poor countries to give to animals in the rich countries. Subsidies, we mentioned a little bit, there are lots of subsidies being given to the animal agriculture industry. The loss of health costs, both cancer, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, and antibiotics are problems caused by animal agriculture and eating animals. So there are lots and lots of reasons to go vegan. But in this presentation, I've talked mostly about the ethics of it all. To learn more, there's a lot of movies that you can see. Forks Over Knives is about the health perspective. Cowspiracy is all about the environment. And Earthlings is really good if you want to see all the scary pictures that prove all the points that I've made in this presentation. So Earthlings is also free of charge on YouTube, so just go search for it and you'll find it. And it should open your mind, definitely. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching. Came to almost an hour and a half. Thank you very much. And let me know if you have any questions, of course.